What does water baptism do according to the scriptures?
Nothing, right? I notice you keep emphasizing the word water baptism in your video.
What does water baptism do? What does water baptism do?
I assume you're referring to 1 Peter 3, where Peter is very clear that the physical act of baptism itself doesn't accomplish some sort of cleansing. That's why he says it's not the removal of dirt, but the pledge or testimony of a good conscience. I want to give you 5 reasons Peter is not arguing that baptism affects one's salvation. Number 1, we know this isn't his soteriology because he gives this soteriology in chapter 1. And he explains, we've been born of God through the word, the preaching of the good news. We are being guarded presently by faith, and it's this faith that will persevere us to the very end. So Peter's soteriology is in chapter 1. Chapter 3 is not about justification. The second reason is Peter tells us that baptism does something for our conscience. And notice that in chapter 3, baptism isn't the only thing that affects one's conscience. He tells us suffering, doing good works that result in public humiliation is also a means to a good conscience. A conscience in scripture is like the dashboard of your car. It tells you whether or not things are going well. A conscience can be broken, it can be correct, it can be clean, and it can also be seared. In this case, he says baptism is actually a public pledge of a good conscience before God. Meaning, he's not teaching that baptism works ex operato. That is, the ordinance itself in isolation doesn't affect your salvation. He's teaching ex operato, that the ordinance is effective as a demonstration of the faith of the subject. In other words, good works and the act of baptism as a public oath are demonstrations of your inward faith in your Creator and His work through Christ. Thirdly, the context of Peter's statement is about how Jesus actually brings us to God. Before Peter makes this remark about baptism, he sandwiches it between statements about how Jesus' suffering, death, and resurrection are actually what bring us to God, not baptism. Because the fourth reason is he's trying to bolster up their perseverance in suffering. So not only does he remind them that Jesus' suffering is actually the path to their salvation and presentation to God, he then cites Noah as a primary Old Testament example. And that's significant because the ark didn't fetch Noah's favor before God. Noah had the ark from his favor with God. Genesis is very clear that Noah found favor in God's eyes, and that's why he was given the ark. The ark did not affect his justification. It was given from it, his faith in God, as Hebrews teaches us. And so fifthly, what Peter is doing throughout 1 Peter 3 and 4 is he's teaching this covenant community that they are in the same place as Noah. He's trying to bolster up this community's perseverance in the public eye. And so chapters 3 to 4 are all about helping them to persevere. So he points to Jesus, the one who affects their salvation by his death, right? Humiliation accomplishes their victory. Secondly, he cites Noah's example. The ark was the point of humiliation to the public world. Only a few people were saved, and so they were ostracized by the world. And yet they found the act of building the ark and getting in it was a demonstration of God's favor. So Peter is saying, so you too, Christian, through your baptism, which was a public covenant act, in other words, it's a badge that actually is currently bringing your humiliation from the world. It's a reason for the world to mock you. How silly of you to think you need Jesus. And what Peter is saying is that very token of humiliation is actually your salvation. He's trying to ease their conscience. He's telling them, you may be humiliated before man, but baptism is evidence that you have a clear conscience before God. So keep suffering with Christ. It was by his death and resurrection that you've been saved and brought to God. So don't be ashamed of your baptism. It may bring you humiliation, but it's also a sign of your salvation.